I'm assuming we're gonna get started right on time. Look at us, 6 o'clock. Welcome everybody. Thank you for sharing an hour with us this afternoon on this beautiful spring day. My name is Katie Breckheimer and I will be your host this evening. We appreciate your flexibility with this new platform that we're trying. We're all learning how this works. I wish we were all together. One of the great things about Green Drinks for me is the community it creates. So when we're not able to be together in person, this is the next best thing. But we'll get back together. Oh, and I've got my green drink. It's my reusable water bottle. I want you all to be using those. This evening, the plan is for me to talk a little bit about who we are and what we're all about and what's coming up. I'm going to introduce our speaker, Lee Warren, who's the Executive Director of the Organic Grower School. Lee will speak for about 35 minutes. During that time, if you have questions, we encourage you to write them in the Q&A section of your screen. And we'll get to them after the presentation. So if you'll just hold off on your questions and start typing them in, we'll get them in a queue. I'm going to be keeping my eye on the clock, so we'll wrap things up at 7 and we'll all get to our dinners. I'm pleased to say that we're in our 5th year of Green Drinks locally, which is sponsored by Mountain True, Conserving Carolina, and Appalachian Coffee Company, where we hope we'll be back in person when it gets safe to go back and be together. I want to thank my steering committee who helps me plan and put on these events, and especially today I want to thank Katie Morris, who is our technical support in coordinating this program. So what is Green Drinks? We are actually a chapter of an international movement. Get-togethers like ours happen all over the world. There are about 500 chapters worldwide where people get together and learn about and talk about what's going on with the environment. Before we begin, I want to tell you a little bit about who's coming up, our upcoming speakers. On May 14th, we'll offer another virtual Green Drinks with the same webinar style format. We're having Lauren Pyle, who's the Executive Director of Environmental Educators for North Carolina. And she will speak on the vision of their organization, which is trying to create an environmentally literate citizenry. Environmental educators are having their annual conference in Hendersonville this fall. I hope they're able to get together by then. On June 11th, our speaker is a reschedule since social distancing forced us to cancel our March Green Drinks. We want to try again with Carlene Dixon, who's the director of the Parks and Recreation Department of Henderson County. And Carlene's going to talk to us about what's happening with our parks. And this may be another virtual format, but we'll keep you posted on that. On July 9th, Andrew Tate, director of a company called Eco Foresters, will present on positive impact forestry. Be looking on Conserving Carolina and Mountain True's website, our calendars, and our social media for what's coming up. We are always, Green Drinks is always on the 2nd Thursday of the month. So without further ado, I want to introduce Lee Warren. My husband Steve and I are avid organic gardeners. We've been at it for quite a while. So when I saw Lee's column in a recent Mountain Express, I read it with interest and thought she would be a great addition to our Green Drinks. Lee has been the executive director of the Organic Grower School, a 501c3 nonprofit based in Asheville since 2013. She is a sustainability professional with 25 years of experience envisioning, designing, and living innovative solutions to organic food systems, community, and sustainability education. Thanks for being with us, Lee. You're on.
Lee, it looks like you're still muted, so if you can go ahead and...
Oh, there we go.
There we go, that would help. So hello everyone. I see there's about 14 of you. I'd love to see your faces, but it doesn't look like it's set up that way. But if we have any engagement during the presentation, please chat and I'll try to navigate both screens. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen and hope that we can make it work. All right, Katie, tell me if you can you see the PowerPoint screen?
Yes, we can see your PowerPoint.
Excellent. So before I introduce myself more and tell you where we're gonna go, I'm gonna start with this quote. And I think these times have been stressful for a lot of people and certainly tumultuous. So I just invite you to take a breath, take a minute, get in your bodies, and hear from our modern prophet, Wendell Berry. The soil is the great connector of our lives, the source and destination of all. It is the healer and restorer and resurrector by which disease passes into health, age into youth, death into life. Without proper care for it, we can have no community, because without proper care for it, we can have no life. So Organic Grower School is the organization that I am so lucky to work for. I'm the executive director, and I will call it OGS for short. It is a 501c3 nonprofit serving the Southern Appalachian community with affordable, hands-on, practical adult education on organic growing and sustainable living. We just celebrated our 27th annual spring conference, so that means our organization was started in 1993. Founded by regional farmers and extension agents with a mission to inspire, educate, and support people to farm, garden, and live organically. We do have an office in West Asheville, but we do what's called pop-up education. We work around the region on farms, campuses, and private venues, and of course now endlessly on Skype. And we take our show on the road for the most part. So here are our goals. We want more farmers on the land and a system in which family farms can flourish. We want a garden, an orchard, and chickens in every yard. We want healthy, informed, and engaged consumers choosing homegrown and local and organic food. And we want a democratic, equitable, and just food system. Now, you might think that's ambitious, and to some extent it is, but we want to really reclaim agriculture, and we believe this reclamation will create strengthened communities and establish food sovereignty in our region, and I will talk about that more. So OGS serves thousands of farmers, gardeners, eaters, and sustainability seekers and community leaders each year. And we are definitely advocating for an organic food system in the form of small scale and regional food production as a solution to the environmental, economic, health crises of our time, and as definitely an abject alternative to industrial and global food practices. So I'm going to take us on a little bit of a deep dive into what doesn't work about our global food system in order to circle back around to why it's important to grow organic. And from our organization's perspective, we try not to focus on what's not working and more on where we want to go, but I think it's really helpful to do a bit of an analysis. And when I say industrial agriculture, I'm using that word interchangeably with mechanized agriculture, global food systems, and big ag. So I'm sort of meaning similar things. And by that, I'm defining that as agriculture that is farms of large sizes combined with very high degrees of specialization, reliance on off-farm inputs and synthetic fertilizers, and producing mostly commodities. So that system, that industrial system, is really resulting in a lot of problems. You see the top 5 that I have here, and I'm going to talk about each of them. And this brings up grief for people. It brings up grief for me. I would just say it's really helpful to look at the reality of what we're dealing with and breathe through it. And we are going to get to some exciting solution-based ideas as well. So, you know, environmental crises, increased world hunger and health problems, and the over-reliance on this complex system leads to things like equity issues and losing our self-reliance and sort of community resilience. That picture is a really great image and represents the amount of petroleum it takes to create our modern food. And the statistic is for every 1 calorie that we put in our mouths, there's 10 calories of petroleum that gets it to our mouths. So that's pretty significant, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. So the environmental problems, many of you likely know that the modern system is using intensive tillage, a lot of monocropping, synthetic inputs, extensive irrigation, genetic modification, the factory farming of animals. Farmers have become drivers and sprayers, and it's mostly a dead-end approach. This is really just since after World War II, so this started in 1947, but it's really left 3 types of irreparable environmental damage over the last 70 years. That would be a nitrogen contamination problem in soil and water, a significant loss of biodiversity. So between 1903 and 1983, we've lost 93% of our vegetable varieties, and less nutritious food. Our friend Dan Kittredge from the Bionutrient Association tells this great story of if you wanted to eat an apple that had the nutrient equivalent. So if someone eating an apple in 1950, in order to reach that nutrient equivalent, you'd have to eat 26 apples today. That's how depleted our soil systems are. So another way to see this is the chemical treadmill. It's also called the pesticide treadmill, right? Whoops. Ever increasing inputs. So we've increased global fertilizer use by 8 times in the last 40 years, but only doubled production in that same time. And this horrifying statistic of 1 billion pounds of pesticides are used in the US, and 17,000 pesticide products are on the market. Also ever increasing damage, we talked about that, and the resistance, right? So weed resistance, disease resistance, and new pests, and all kinds of other problems. Let's see. Yeah, so this is the chart that talks about for every calorie of food requires 10 calories of fossil fuels to produce. And that is from production to transportation to all of the pieces that you see on that list. And to give you some context, in 1940, 1 calorie, so if we would eat 2.3 calories of food, there was 1 calorie of fossil fuel energy that used to create that 2.3 calories. So we've sort of inverted and exponentially increased that process with our industrial system. And to give you some context, the average vegetable travels 1,500 miles to get to where it's eaten. And this decade, in the coming years, 75% of our fruits and 50% of our vegetables will come from a foreign country. Okay, we're still on environmental challenges. This is a big list. So GMO foods, you know, there's lots of evidence and research out there that it's not great for our health. Jeffrey Smith has done a couple of movies that I can put in the chat box later. One is called Genetic Roulette, and another one is called Secret Ingredients, that really talks about the effects on human health of GMO foods. And from an agricultural perspective, there's been really very little yield benefit, and they also produce pesticide resistance, additional pesticide use, and then there's a lot of genetic pollution because these things spread to other crops. And it's just perpetuating the monoculture piece. Factory farming, many of you probably are aware of CAFOs. It stands for Confinement Animal Feeding Operations. This is an example of a chicken house, but there's also pig houses and stockyards with beef cows, beef animals. And the goal is to bring livestock to the market at the lowest possible cost. But because these crowded conditions and the monoculture nature, they have to be given high quantities of antibiotics, and then they're fed a pretty high grain-based diet, which is not what these animals are generally thriving on. So, you know, in addition to this being inhumane, we have a lot of waste, right? This is 1 million tons of manure every day from factory farmed animals, often going into lagoons, which have a tendency to leak or spill and contaminate human watering systems. So when you hear ideas that agriculture is contributing to climate change, it's mostly these systems. It's big farms that are doing monocropped crops, as well as these contributing. So, and agriculture right now, I think it's saying that agriculture is contributing about 12% to total greenhouse gas emissions. Okay, hunger problems. So, you know, the promise of mechanized agriculture, which was called, you know, the Green Revolution back in the 40s and 50s, the promise to feed the world has really fallen short, because what is true is that we have about 842 million people in the world who are food insecure, and in the US that's 40 million, or 1 in 8 Americans. In fact, North Carolina is the 10th hungriest state, with more than 600,000 households dealing with not enough to eat. And in Western North Carolina, we have 100,000 of those people, even though we have less population than some other parts of the state. And we have 1 in 4 children facing uncertainty about their next meal. There's a great quote from a book that I love called A Nation of Farmers, which is, we face of the very real possibility that our children may be poorer and hungrier and less healthy than we, which is sort of the opposite of what humans want to do. They want to make a better world for their children. And just to say a little bit about the complexity of hunger, how is it that people are hungry when we're actually producing more food than we're consuming, which is true. And it's really related to a complex set of policy ideas. It's not just coming from agriculture, but that's all interwoven when you have this sort of corporate system. So there's the complexity of poverty and the lack of purchasing power. There's how we set up neighborhoods and zoning laws and create food deserts so that people don't have access to their own self-reliance. Agricultural policy, which proposes to support commodity crops and not quote unquote real food. And we have no right to food in the US compared to 158 countries which feel that food is a right. So this is sort of this matrix of complexity. All right, so health problems. This is a doozy, right? According to the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, 90% of our annual healthcare expenditures in this country, which is a whopping $3.3 trillion, go to people with chronic health conditions. So I'm gonna say that again, 90% of that 3.3 trillion treat people with chronic health conditions, which are diet related, right? This is like the biggest mind blower. So the top killers, right, are heart disease, stroke, type 2 diabetes, and cancer. These are all diet related preventable illnesses. And this is like half of the American population has 1 or more of these chronic diseases. And poor diet is a leading cause of mortality in our country. So what the heck is going on with our food system if people are this sick? So, you know, Michael Pollan says, it turns out that too much food can be nearly as big a problem as too little. And in this context, when we think about healthcare, in 1960, we had 5% of our national economy going to healthcare, and in 2016, it was 18%, right? So let's break that down a little bit more. So in 1960, per person, the US was, in the US, we spent $151 per person per year. And then in 2016, it shot up to over $10,000 per person per year. That's 69 times. But if that was just inflation, we would have gone from 151 to 1248, but we didn't. It's nearly 10 times that. So something is going on with our food system. Let me just see this, okay. So at the same time that these healthcare costs were going up, the food budget of most US households was going down. So the same time period, 1960, we spent 18% of our income on food, to 2016, where we spent less than 10%. So from a big picture perspective, we look at this in the context of population growth as well. And we can see that what caused this, right? So grains, cereal grains, commodity crops. So when we talk about commodity crops, we're talking about corn and soy and rice and wheat, right? The things that are grown on a really large scale that are subsidized by the government, right? So that's a huge, huge part of American agriculture, and the market gets flooded with these grains that actually sell for less than they cost to produce, believe it or not. So then from these are sort of made these endless, cheap, sugary, heavily processed products, such as, you know, cereals and snack foods and chips and soda and gum and juice and all of that sort of high calorie, low nutrient food, which is a huge, large percentage of our diet. And then what we know is that cheap calories lead to chronic illness and obesity. There's a great article in the Washington Post called "How Corn Made Its Way into Just About Everything We Eat" by a man named Roberto Ferdman. And he says the grain is so ubiquitous that it would take longer to list the foods that contain traces of it than to pinpoint the ones that don't. And similarly, Michael Pollan says our entire diet has been colonized by one plant. Great. So that's the part about the, you know, the hunger and the healthcare all intertwined. And then we have these inequity problems in our larger system as well. We have stolen lands from indigenous people. We have stolen labor from African and other cultures. And we have the New Deal and the farm bills that really penalized farm workers and domestic workers, and also had really systematized attempts to take land away from folks of color. So the outcome has been that 90% of our US farmland is owned by white folks when they're only 60% of the population. So this is a whole topic we could spend the entire 2 hours talking about, inequity in the food system. Yeah, so making up this sort of marginality or othering that perpetuates this sort of structural thing that corporate power actually perpetuates. And then there's these structural structural injustices, and you see this sort of who makes money in our culture, and then the food insecurity rates impact single parent households and people of color communities more. Food deserts are in both cities and rural areas, are food deserts with racialized populations and policies and outcomes that have not been good for generations. Income disparities for food and farm workers, and disparities in accessing land and accessing power. So these are, you know, the challenging, part of the challenging pieces we face. All right, this is the last bad section of bad news. But again, I think it's so important for us to have a critical analysis of what we're working with to know why we're choosing something different. So this whole section, loss of local systems, I'm going to talk about each one of these, is so dear to my heart, and it's so core to the mission of Organic Grower School. And just to say that, you know, the Industrial Revolution, the Green Revolution, the Agricultural Revolution that started in the late 40s promised to liberate us from rural life and physical toil. And it's created a lot of problems, you know, problems that we can see statistically and look at. But this is in some ways one of the invisible set of problems. It's harder to see these. These are a little bit more systemic. So I will say that the loss of farms and farmland, we're losing agricultural land at a drastic rate. So 175 acres every hour, 1.5 million acres a year. And the average age of farmers nationally is 58 and heading towards retirement. And that means over the next 15 years, a third of American farmland is going to change hands. And I'm going to guess that most of it's going to go towards development, because there's not the same transition of farmland from one generation to the next. It's just not what's been happening. Loss of food community. I love talking about the Victory Gardens, and some of you may know about them, or have heard about them or even remember them. And the idea is that during World War I and World War II, there was a concerted propaganda campaign from the US government for people to grow their own food. They provided seeds, they provided tools, they provided support, and more than 20 million victory gardens all over the country produced 45% of the fruits and vegetables consumed during that time. And 90% of those people had not grown gardens, right? So these were folks, city folks. There's a lot of information about Chicago's victory gardens, and I love that there was 14,000 garden plots in Chicago, and in one there was a gigantic 800 family garden. Can you imagine the sort of food community that grew up around that? So we don't have those, and also in churches and homes and in all kinds of gatherings, we used to really celebrate our food communities, and we don't quite as much. Loss of land-based literacy. This is a big one. We have people coming to Organic Grower School all the time because they're wanting to farm or homestead or do land-based living. And I really try to give them this context, which is 150 years ago, 90% of the population farmed. And by farmed, we mean, you know, their own food, fuel, clothing, lighting, transportation, and food for their transportation, which was likely horses, and storage systems. And then 100 years ago, 50%. That's 100 years ago is about when my grandmother was born. She was born in 1916. So it's certainly within my life experience to know someone in that age range. 50% of the population farmed, and the other 50% have basic cooking, growing, you know, food literacy and pantry literacy, storage. And then 50 years ago, 30% of the population farmed. And I'm wondering if you all can type in the chat box how much you think it is today. Actually. Maybe you can call out those numbers to me, one of the Katies.
Sure. So far we've got 5%, 3%, another 5%, 10%, and then a less than 15%.
Really good guesses. Really good guesses. It's less than 2%. Yeah. Can you all still see my screen okay? You're seeing the slide? Is it good?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay. Fabulous. It's hard to navigate back to the Zoom when I'm here, so I might just have you call out. That seemed to work pretty well. Okay, so this is a great quote from Joel Salatin, which is, "The first supermarket supposedly appeared on the American landscape in 1946. That is not very long ago. Until then, where was all the food? Dear folks, the food was in the homes, gardens, local fields, and forests. It was near kitchens, near tables, near bedsides. It was in the pantry, the cellar, and the backyard." Right? So if we have insecurity now, if we have people who are concerned about not having food, they can't go out to their yard and gather the eggs and gather the greens and have the kind of access that we all had not that long ago. So that's a huge loss of independence. So this is also loss of local control. Some people may have seen this image before. It represents the top 10 corporations represented by Kraft, Nestle, Coca-Cola, PepsiCo, Procter & Gamble, General Mills, Kellogg's, Johnson & Johnson, Mars, and that one I don't recognize, that one with the U, who represent hundreds and thousands of brands that we all buy, including organic, including natural, including GMO-free, mostly processed foods in this category. All of our money is going to those corporations. So when we think about the money leaving the community, this is the fastest way for it to do so. But it's not just processed foods. The 4 largest meat processors handle more than 80% of all meat products in the US. That's four companies. And in the dairy industry, more than 50% of the milk is produced by only 3% of the dairies. And those dairies have more than 1,000 cows each. And when you think about this in terms of bringing it down to the personal, In the state of Wisconsin, there used to be 75,000 dairies in the 70s. And today there are fewer than 7,500, with hundreds more going out of business each year. So, you know, we're in a similar farm crisis these days as to what we were when the Farm Aid process, what happened in the 80s, for similar reasons. There's a lot of corporate control. Okay, and then loss of local money. ASAP, you might know, that's a local organization, Appalachian Sustainable Agriculture Project, did a study of food spending in Western North Carolina. They did one in 2007 and again, I think in 2012, but I have the 2007 numbers. And in all of Western North Carolina, we spend $2.2 billion on food per year. And in all categories of local food at that time, we spent 14.5 million on local food. And so that's less than 1%. So collectively, all of us are spending less than 1% on local food, right? And it's similar from a producer perspective, right? In all of the Western counties, usually it's less than 1% of farmers' food goes directly to individuals for human consumption. Okay, we can take a deep breath. I'm done with the bad news. So the question is now, what do we choose? How do we choose? What do we do? How do we step away from that process? And so this is a great image of, like, do we want the image on the left, where a farmer controls her life and food and land and production systems, or do we want the system on the right, where it's corporate controlled? And I think I know what most of us would choose. So what are the solutions? And it's, you know, no accident that we have a picture of the soil there. Here's one of my biggest sheroes, Dr. Vandana Shiva. She says, the biggest thing we can do for humanity is to work with the soils. And I think for those of us in organic and sustainable food work and agriculture, we do feel that this work can change the culture from the ground up, literally. But before we go a whole lot further, I wanted to slow down and define, I keep using this word a lot, called food system, and I wanted to define it for you. And it starts there in that sort of red rust-colored arrow, and it goes all around, and it sort of feeds into itself. It's a cycle. So it's sort of a complex set of actors, activities, institutions that link production to consumption and back again. So as you can see, it's producing, processing, distributing, accessing, consuming, recovering or waste processing, and back to producing. Now this whole cycle can be filled with a global system, or it can be, you know, it can be infused with a sustainable system, which would be more local. And we're going to talk now about sustainable food systems. So these three bubbles represent what's often called the three legs of sustainability, or the triple bottom line, or the three Ps, people, planet, profit. Some of you have heard it from different perspectives. B Corps are companies that are concerned about all three of these things and not just economics. So in general, across all sectors, the social leg of the stool, of the bubble, I teach a class where I use the word stool. So whether it's a three-legged stool or three bubbles, the idea is livability, health and well-being, human rights, labor rights, fair justice system, cultural celebration, place-based connection, low poverty. So that's the social bubble. The environmental bubble is represented by ecological integrity. So we're talking about clean air, clean oceans, clean soil, vibrant forests, species preservation, things that most of us care about. And then the economic bubble implies that income exceeds expenses in a given system, that there's revenue, that there's living wages, that there's sector diversity, that there's robust job markets. So all of these things matter if we're going to continue something, if something is going to be sustainable. So how do we translate that to sustainable agriculture? I would say really simply, it's making sure the ecosystem is healthy, and the ecosystem is the farm, and that there's a high quality of life both in the farm and in the community, and that there's financial success for farmers. I can't stress this enough. We teach you know, year-round farmer training programs, and the thing we have to really convey is that enterprise models need to work. They need to be successful. Otherwise, you're not going to stay in farming, because it has to work out to financial gain. And so here's some other ways that we use the same words interchangeably, and you may have heard some of these words: ecologically minded farming, climate smart farming, regenerative, biointensive, sustainable, resilient, restorative, carbon farming, biological. And so what all of these words share in common is that they're innovative practices pioneered by sustainable farmers over the last 50 years. And we stand on the shoulders of our ancestors and traditional indigenous people who used these practices for eons before we decided we were going to screw it up and do a whole bunch of industrial agriculture. So I don't want to make it sound like it's just these innovators. I think we are discovering more and more how traditional peoples have cared for the land much longer than we ever realized. But these practices have a lot in common. They cultivate soil health, they increase farm profitability and biodiversity, they slow down climate change, and most of all, they care about the big picture: community well-being, natural resources, and they're producing great food. So 3 of these words that I'll just mention quickly, because you're probably hearing them a lot, is restorative. Implies sort of taking a degraded, damaged system and turning it into more ecological vibrancy. Regenerative means building soil health in a faster and more robust way than otherwise we would have if we're really paying attention to soil health. And resilience means that we develop systems in our farms that resist, tolerate, absorb, recover from, prepare for, and adapt to change. So, and we're not just talking about climate change. COVID-19 is a perfect example of that, of how farms have to be resilient to be able to cope with some of these cultural changes. So what does it look like in practice? So sustainable ag means a locally adapted, integrated system of plant and animal production with 3 components. Now, you know, people get their PhDs in this and write theses, but I'm going to break it down to super simple 3 components: minimal disturbance, recycling nutrients, and encouraging diversity. So those are the things. And if you want to talk to your farmer about how they do that, I'm sure they'd love to explain it. And how that looks on a more specific level, you've probably heard these phrases: no or low-till agriculture, keeping the soil covered at all times, stream buffers. Recycling nutrients looks like cover crops and crop rotation, integrating animals in a holistic grazing or integrated management system, natural fertilizers, so compost, manure, minerals, and keeping all those nutrients recycling on the farm. And then encouraging diversity would be perennial polycultures, multi-species in every aspect, animal integration, and agroforestry. So you can sort of start to see that the biological model, we're really farming in nature's image, and we have a lot to learn. There is always a learning process going on. We're taking lots of information in. We realize this is a cyclical thing. We see the farm as an ecosystem. We have enterprise integration. An example of that is if you have a small dairy and you're making cheese and you have skim milk, you give that skim milk to the pigs and the chickens to give them high nutrient quality input. Many enterprises integrated at once, lots of diversity, higher value products, multi-use equipment, and active marketing. You know, the farmers are out there marketing. And then on the industrial model, you have exactly the opposite. It's energy intensive, it's a linear process, the farm is a factory, and on and on. But it's helpful to see it side by side. So yeah, small farms are the key to reversing climate change. We didn't discuss this, but farmers have been facing unprecedented changes. I'm sure you all are hearing about this: temperature, rainfall, drought, flooding, fires. And these management challenges are no joke. We're talking soil erosion, more pest and disease populations, novel pests, invasive species, lack of pollinators. And when we have small farms that are integrated into the community and we can have them be economically successful, they're going to be more resilient. They're going to be more able to adjust to changes. So unless you may think I'm making this all up, I want to give you a few pieces from around the world where experts are coming out with similar ideas. So in 2013, this publication, it's a 300-page publication from 60 experts around the world. It's titled, you can probably see the title there, Wake Up Before It's Too Late. But the next part of the title is Make Agriculture Truly Sustainable Now for Food Security in a Changing Climate. And they recommend a significant shift away from conventional monoculture-based food systems with lots of heavy inputs and moving towards mosaics of sustainable regenerative production systems that improve the productivity of the small-scale farm. This is from the IPCC, which is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. 400 participants representing 59 countries, convened by the UN and the World Bank, who are saying incredible things like industrial agriculture is dangerous and ecological farming is the future. And we need food security. We need small scale farmers controlling the food, and fair trade and local knowledge and democratic participation. I am having a little trouble with my internet connection at the moment. Are you all still there, Katie? Or can you see me and hear me still?
We can still see and hear you.
Okay. I'm not sure why this isn't loading. I guess I'll just go on to the next one. So this is from Michael Pollan. He wrote a fabulous, so Michael Pollan's the author of Omnivore's Dilemma and In Defense of Food. He's a great American food writer. And in 2007, he wrote an article called Farmer in Chief. And these are the three things he's saying. Resolarize the farm, which means get everything back on the fresh air, the fresh grass and sunlight. Re-regionalize the food system and rebuild America's food culture. If you haven't read that article, it's a classic. He gives very specific examples about how to do that. And then, of course, don't eat anything your great-grandmother wouldn't recognize as food. It's a great rule to live by. So what can I do? You know, first and foremost, whenever you spend a nickel, dime, or quarter dollar, you are telling the market economy exactly what you want more of. I can't stress this enough. We vote for the things we want to create. So if we're buying organic food from China at Walmart, you're saying to the you know, natural market, you're saying, I want more of this, please. If you're buying directly from farmers, you're saying, I want more of this, please. So just be mindful about where all of your money goes. You're creating the world you want every single day. And in terms of the value of money, I love this work. David Korten is an author. He wrote When Corporations Rule the World. Soil, not money, is the source of wealth, and our economic system needs to reflect that. But until it does, we need to reflect that. He also talks about how real wealth is beyond price and unavailable for purchase. So it's healthy, happy children, loving families and communities, fertile land, pure, clean water. So money is not wealth, right? We want that kind of world. So what else can you do? So voting with your dollars can look like don't use pesticides, buy direct from farmers, shop at farmers markets, support organizations like Organic Grower School, grow your own food. And if you have time and energy and a willingness to speak out, you know, promote ecological agriculture. You can protect farmland, support local economies, promote the institutional use of fresh food, educate for agricultural literacy. This is a great quote from Alice Waters, the famous chef. The act of eating is very political. Everything we put in our mouths is saying what our politics are. Whoops. So here's another piece about the benefits of gardening, and maybe some of you already do, but just there's nothing that matches the beauty and food creation, and you can really control the quality of your food when you're growing. It can save money, and research is showing that contact with soil releases serotonin, dopamine, and other neurotransmitters that are responsible for happiness, joy, bliss, and euphoria. In fact, there's a very specific microbe in the soil that has the effect similar to antidepressants, apparently even in 10 minutes. If anybody was at ASAP's Healthy Eating Conference, just type a little note in the chat box in 2018. Katie let me know, and she wrote a great book called Pharmacology, and I remember seeing she had 2 slides up there. She was here in Asheville. One was a slide of the gut microbiome, and one was a slide of the soil microbiome. And they looked identical, right? This was my real dawning awareness of how dependent our gut health is on soil health. And it's partly why so many of us have chronic digestive issues, is because of what has been happening in the soil. It sort of mirrors. And more research is showing that the gut contains about the same number of microorganisms, sort of this microbiome, 100 trillion bacteria, viruses, fungi, and protozoa in that whole diverse soup. And when we deplete the soil, we deplete that in us. So get out there, build your soil, and so your soil is healthy and your guts will be amazingly healthy. Also, we see the longer term and bigger picture benefits of growing on any scale to be enhancing your personal food security, building confidence and self-reliance, increasing environmental stewardship, we see this a lot, and creating a deeper connection to nature. And gardening is very accessible. Reach out to me if you want more resources about how to get started. I often say, people ask, what is the ultimate outcome if we're successful at what we're doing? If we get farmers being thriving, and we get home growers growing, and we get consumers to be wised up about what they're eating. I like to say that the ultimate outcome is a very empowered population, successfully growing organically on a farm, home, and community scale. So they're financially and nutritionally resourced and ready to take a seat at the political table to advocate for a more equitable, sustainable, and accessible food system, and what we all want, which is a vibrant, engaged community. So I will just end with this Vandana Shiva quote, which is, if governments won't solve the climate, hunger, health, and democracy crises, then the people will. Regenerative agriculture provides the answers to the soil crisis, the food crisis, the health crisis, the climate crisis, and the crisis of democracy. So that's a powerful way to end. Thank you so much. And I guess we'll do questions. If you have questions, you can type them in the chat box, unless, Katie, you want to do breakout groups or you want to turn people's mutes off. It depends on how y'all want to handle this.
Sure, if folks have questions, you can go ahead and ask them in the Q&A, and then we'll have Lee field them as they come in.
Well, I'll start off. Lee, I wondered if you would talk a little bit about the success of the Organic Grower School. We've been following you guys since the beginning, and it seems to be the interest is growing, and you're teaching and training a lot of young farmers. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I had mentioned in the presentation that the average age nationally of farmers is 58 and aging, and that's really true, you know, and the USDA and other government agencies after the farm crisis of the 80s really came out and said, you know, this traditional method of transfer is just not working anymore. Kids are moving away from the farms, the farm families are not the same, so we have a whole new face of farmer. We have, you know, certainly young people, certainly second career people, veterans, just a whole slew of diverse people. But often the one thing they have in common is that they don't have much experience with farming. So they're starting from entry level, ground zero, and they're often not very well financed. So that's one of the challenges we face in doing farmer training, is how do we take these folks who haven't worked a day in their life on a farm and turn them into viable, successful, you know, on every scale farmers. And it's no small process. We consider the beginning farmer journey to be 10 years long. You know, it takes them fully 10 years to get to the point where they can say that their business is working.
Okay, so you have farmers, wannabe farmers, and wannabe gardeners. So you have that broad range?
Yeah, so we do. We have sort of divisions within our tiny little nonprofit where we have a farmer programs division. We serve year-round programs for farmers. And then we sort of have this sort of what we call home grower, homesteader, gardener division where we do gardening classes and homesteading classes and all kinds of, we do 2 conferences a year that appeals to a wide range of people. And we do less consumer education because we sort of have our hands full with the grower education model, and there's so many resources out there for consumers. But if we had the capacity, we'd love to touch everyone along this whole spectrum. And we love it when people come to our conferences and take cooking classes or keep a little pot of lavender on their windowsill. I mean, we feel like any connection with plants and growing is a great step.
We had a question come in the Q&A. Thanks, Grady, for your question. Grady asked, can you give a neophyte gardener a point to where to find resources for starting with North Carolina gardens?
And North Carolina gardens, like, did you want to participate in a community garden, or did you want to start a garden in your own yard? I can speak to both of those, but if you want to address that, there are amazing, I don't know how folks are in Western North Carolina. This is the Henderson County Green Drinks, but there are resources online. And I can send them to Katie afterwards about how to find a community garden. And that's a great way to start because there's other people there who are willing to help and start personal gardens. Okay, great. And, you know, starting in your own yard, right? So how can it be like the easiest, most simple, and you want to be able to be successful, right? Because if you're successful, then you're just going to keep learning and keep doing. So can you do a little flower border around your house, right? Right up near the house? Or is there a little patch of grass that you can turn from grass and put in some plants there? There's huge amounts. I mean, we do a gardening series every year in person and live, although this year we had to do it on Zoom. There's lots of YouTube, there's lots of paid online classes. I would say just get started at whatever scale with whatever resources you have, because really plants want to grow, and it's such a delight. It's just so nourishing. I can say for myself, it's so soul nourishing to be engaging with the natural world in that way. So start where you can.
Well, if I could give Grady a little advice, I know Grady and I know his house.
Right.
So start tracking your sun. See what part of your yard gets the best sun, and then start a little patch right there, and start small and see what you get. But I love the fact that he's interested. Go for it.
Yeah, absolutely. And visiting other people's gardens, if you know people who have gardens, you know, every single person on this planet who has a garden wants to show it off. Like, no exceptions. Like, come to my house. I will show you all my plants. I will tell you more information than you ever wanted to know about everything. And that can get you inspired and hang out, you know, offer to help a friend who has a garden. Say, can I just come and learn? It's such a great way to learn. Is what I think about is heart to heart, hand to hand, eye to eye, which, you know, we're not doing so much of that these days with social distancing. But if you can get in there and really help someone who knows what they're doing, that transfer of information will be so much more full.
We had another question come in on the Q&A. Kalia asks, where is a good place around Rutherford or Hendersonville to get seeds or affordable plants to begin gardening?
Yeah, so a lot of people do seeds through mail order, and is certainly right now is a great way to do that. So True Seed is a local seed company in Asheville, and they're awesome. They do heritage and heirloom seeds, so you could still order from them and get it in the mail. And then Southern Exposure Seed Exchange is also a fabulous company, and they're in Virginia. I'm guessing your local feed stores in Rutherford County would carry some seeds. I'm not sure if they'd have organic or biodynamic, but you could certainly ask, or you certainly could stop in and visit them. I know most of those places are open as essential services right now. And then in terms of starts, I would say the same thing. Probably your local feed stores. And I know that Red Wing Farm in Swannanoa, they do organic and biodynamic starts, and they are doing online ordering and delivery. So they might be making like one delivery to a drop location in Hendersonville, I would reach out to them. They have the best starts. And if you all, Katie or Katie, know any other places, please jump in. Hendersonville Co-op, excellent idea. Excellent idea.
Good. Are you seeing anything else, Katie?
We don't have any other questions popping up right now, so if anyone else has questions, this is your moment to ask them.
So Lee, can I ask you? You mentioned the big organic growers, the large scale ones that are given the best price points, and it's all about consumers wanting the best deal. Do you trust them? Do you know any comment on those?
Yeah, I mean, you know, just because it's organic doesn't mean it's not corporate, right? There could be a 40,000 acre organic farm, right? And they're using mechanized systems. They're sort of not, they're not doing that biological farming. So that's absolutely true. And I think the solution to that, it's a, you know, it's a sort of more commitment. It takes more commitment, but it's having a direct relationship with your farmer. And that means going to the farmers markets, getting to know people, finding out what production systems they use, and, you know, choosing to do that. Now, I know that's not always affordable for people, and we have to make the best choices economically in our own lives. But, you know, I often advise people, if you can afford even some percentage of what your food budget is, to buy locally. I mean, even if it's 10%, that's far better than our region is doing collectively, right? So if you're buying from corporate or large scale, you know, for price points, see if you can do 10% of that with local farmers. And, you know, it might seem like extra work, but I think for those of us that have relationships with our farmers, it's actually becomes a part of our life and our family and our community. It enriches life. So that extra investment is often worth it.
And I know there's some fellow AmeriCorps members on this call, so at least in Asheville, many of the farmers markets will let you use your food stamp or SNAP benefits, and some will even double your points. So that can be a good way to make it affordable if you find
right. Yeah, if you have SNAP benefits, right. AmeriCorps folks, that's a great idea, to double up food bucks, where if you're going to the farmers market, you'll double your money, and that's a fabulous program.
Well, I also heard that our local farmers markets are going to be considered essential services. So that was really good to hear. I hope that holds, because that means we can take the precautions necessary, do the social distancing, do the hand sanitizing, whatever needs to be done, but go visit your local farmers markets. And I know the one in downtown Hendersonville, the farmers have already started to gather there. They have some really beautiful plants. So
absolutely, food in the open air where the sunshine kills virus immediately is definitely an essential service, and it seems way safer to me than going into a big supermarket with artificial lighting. Buncombe County is doing a Saturday market that ASAP is organizing. So if any of you live in Buncombe County, you can check out ASAP Connect online, and great. It's great to hear. I heard that Henderson County and some other counties were bringing back their farmers markets. So please support farmers right now, and grow food. Those are the two things I'm leaving you with. Support local farmers and grow your own food. You can do both.
Right, and they have starts if you're looking for plant starts too.
Yeah, there you go. Perfect.
Farmers markets have those too. Well, it's we have a couple minutes. Katie Morris, any other questions you're seeing? No.
Katie, Grady had asked if you were talking about the market on Church Street.
I was talking about the market on Church Street for sure.
Yeah, get out there and enjoy the spring. You know, even if you're not going, take a walk in the woods, take a walk outside. Even if you are just in your neighborhood, there's so many beautiful flowers and trees blooming. That's gonna also lift your mood and help your healthcare.
Well, that's a great note to end on. So
Yeah.
I'm gonna thank you so much, Lee, for doing our virtual green drinks and being our test drive on our new platform. And
Happy
Forgive us out there for those who couldn't see all of the screen, or give us some feedback. We'll get this right, and we're going to keep doing our environmental education as best we can without being together. But I really hope soon we will all be together in a more physical way. Thanks, Katie Morris, and again, thanks, Lee. It was great.
Thank you, Katie. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.
All right. I'm hoping Katie's gotten us offline. Are we off?